Village Idiot Audio presents The Disembodied Parts, a Rhapsody. Performance by Carlisle Edwards. From the novel by Pablo D'Stair. Episode 2. October. The discovery of my brother's stashed away issue of Appleseed afforded me my first legitimate opportunity in life to give breasts a real once-over. The pairs these illustrated ladies sported were rambunctious. The comic had a plot, so far as I could suss out, involving robotic exosuits and some sort of rebellion. These tenacious soldiers showering off after a tough day of it in the training stocks made the politics seem rather inconsequential, though. Meticulous, I set to rehiding the slim volume, precisely where and in which attitude I'd discovered it. Back behind a makeshift blockade of crayon boxes ceramic art Alvin had kilned in kindergarten and 3 stacks of Jughead double digests. Was it just so? No, spine the other way round. Now a tap more this way, that, slight touch further, like diffusing a landmine re-secreting things. Giving a peek out the window, I found the parking lot was a thick carpet of blackbirds. Or are they crows? If crows, there were murders and murders, a genocide of the rascals. I'd never seen such a gathering. Not a solitary one was moving. No bobbing, tapping concrete or soil with beaks, nibbling under wings. The large pile of trash bags at the lot corner, the collected refuse of the entire neighborhood for the week, pickup being tomorrow, was entirely redacted. Birds coated the mound, a sharp chocolate shell over frozen yogurt. Overhead was a further thick of them, hovering like bargain animation, same 3 frames recycled through. Probably nature had a reason for something like this. Even if not, I was mesmerized, watched for more than an hour before undressing for the bath. I'd brought an issue or 2 of Darkhawk along to peruse while I had my soak. Unfortunately, with my mind shuttling between a few considerations, I'd submerged my hands directly upon sinking into the tub, so the mags kept stacked on the toilet bowl useless. Which may have been for the best. I couldn't seem to tether my mind down to earth, listened to the cackle of the 4 inches of suds as the mound covering me dwindled. The echo quality of this television static sizzle could easily be confused for soft scratches muted by the girth of walls and ceilings around me. Could those birds be covering the house as I lay submerged in the tub? Such absurd associations hazed behind my eyes. I dozed and imagined for every soapsud vanishing, another immobile and soundless fowl would materialize outside. But the entire horde was gone by the time I dried off. No evidence whatsoever of their trespass remained. My memory started playing games with me. Had any of the birds been on the lawns? How was I uncertain? They'd been on the grass of the parking lot islands, the grass by the garbage. But had they been on the sidewalks even? The shrubs, pricker bushes, groupings of flowers? Anywhere? I was more disquieted by where they'd only maybe been than by the fact they'd been at all. Alvin and I buckled into our seats. Our mom was finishing up a banana, hadn't turned on the car, so we kept stum until the din of her talk radio got barking. Alvin Alvin handled his poster board with utmost care, pillowcase wrapped around it like sacrament cloth. I felt sorta crummy not allowing him the entire back seat to lay it out. Then again, we both had things needed discussing. Best get all unpleasantness out of the way en route, he'd suggested, so we could enjoy the comic convention without a head full of wasps. You can lay it over my lap, I don't care, I offered. But no, he was fine. So I set to getting him up to speed on what was distressing me. On Tuesday and then on Wednesday, I'd gotten conflicting information about my blackbirds. I thought they were crows. They were birds which were black. Let's not get overzealous about cataloging them, eh? Our mutual friend Eno, from a neighborhood in the development's first entrance, clean half-mile from our specific cul-de-sac, had been outside the entire day I'd witnessed the swarm. All day and well into the evening. An impromptu flag football tournament followed by an extremely lengthy game of mutants. He hadn't heard peep about birds of any color, let alone seen a plague of them covering the world. This had relieved me. I was more than willing to consider the sight a fragment of dream which had misfiled as memory. Lord knows such things were possible. But the following day after art class, a kid who resided the neighborhood adjacent mine had, completely without solicitation, asked, "You see all them birds Sunday?" When I pressed him, I explained to Alvin, he said he hadn't seen them with his own eyes. Claimed some kid I've never once heard of had talked about it at some birthday party for another kid I don't know. It was impossible to unknot such assertions. Alvin suggested I keep mindful of it all, but not dwell. As for his news, it was far more graphic and unsettling. And just as was the case with mine, a second-hand element tainted it somewhat. The meat was our friend Pincho, perfectly reliable chap not given to flights of exaggeration, had intimated to Alvin the horror of accidentally stepping on a baby bird. Accidentally? Coming home from Pizza Hut with his dad late at night, he felt a gooey crunch underfoot. Right there on the walkway to his door was a bird, it turned out, freshly hatched from the look of it. What was odd, as I knew for myself, having been over to Pincho's house plenty, was how there were no trees overhanging his front yard. A nest on his roof? Except any hatchling would have had to have been blown some solid 15 feet to alight where it had. Plus, the slant of the roof made it absurd to suggest wind would unsettle an object in that direction. Pincho felt awful. Went to get paper towels to clean up the remains. Got back. Something like 24 slugs had clotted over the carcass. My mom interrupted, asking incredulously what in hell we were talking about. Is Pincho killing birds now? Why are you listening to us? I thought that's what your radio's for. But she'd not be so easily diverted into moot chatter. So Alvin, quite impressively, ad-libbed some tap dance concerning a book some older kid had told him about down at the playground the other day. A character is named Pincho. Pincho, in fact. That's why it's so comical. Imagine the Pincho we know and love embroiled in such circumstances. That'd be crackers. Over-under on my mom believing a word of that? Not a wager I'd consider. Hugh Haynes, in the flesh, seemed comfortable with me looming over his shoulder, literally could whiff the peanut butter on my breath while he drafted a medium complexity sketch of the Punisher some conventioneer was plonking down $90 for. Why I was allowed such intimate access? No clue. Hugh Haynes, consummate Gentlemen, my head swam. Alvin comported himself with more refinement, kept near at hand, with a befitting air of dignity, nonchalantly perusing an assortment of the hand-drawn original comic book pages from issues of titles Haynes had worked on. Clever boy. No percentage insinuating himself on the man. Why risk coming off as though aiming to curry favor with regard to the art contest? I eventually drifted over to join Alvin, shocked to discover how many of the original pages were from issues of Nexus I personally owned. Almost the entirety of the pivotal issue 75 was accounted for, the only glaring omission being the 2-page spread wherein Stan gets obliterated by Lena Loomis during his duel with Horatio Hellpop. "Oh, I have that framed on my wall at home," Haynes said, having overheard us. "Not for sale. Any price." An artist's artist, through and through. Soon he was deprecating how his life consisted largely of accepting he'd perpetually be the schmuck who followed in the shadows of iconic illustrators like Steve Rude, Jim Lee, a cursed sort, Mark of Cain, burdened with the knowledge he was forever the poor man's someone better. No doubt this disarming humility was the core reason Haynes drew enough water people like me would form orderly queues for autographs. Not to mention $400, $500, $1,000 a pop for some of these pages. I'd lay even money the man could afford to purchase outright the whole church auditorium where he sat doodling and where 24 comic book shop representatives and specialty collector resellers, both local and from neighboring cities, peddled their wares. A kind of torture being penniless in such a climate. I ached as I roamed the sellers' tables, gaping at the bounty on display. Forget about original artworks. I couldn't even afford an issue of Badger. Why, oh why, did this portly retailer, all the way from Baltimore, have the entire run of the series? Dozens of issues I'd never once laid eyes on in Collector's World. I struck a bargain. If I could convince some punter to purchase a pricier item, could I be rewarded a Badger for my efforts? Fine. But the seller made it specific. "Look over there." Chap holding a hardcover book of erotic prints. Did I clock him? "Get him to make good the transaction. Badger is all yours." Whatever song and dance rubbish I pitched worked a trick. Off he tromped with his sultry purchase, and I dove into the bin to retrieve my due. "Whoa, whoa, whoa," the seller chided as I made to dash off with a double-length prestige format copy of Badger Bedlam. "You said an issue, man, not a special. Think you could come in here running scams?" Shook his jowly head like he regretted someone so sleazy as me ever darkened his doorstep. I made some buffoon apologies, trying to paint how it had been a gag on my part. He glowered while I nabbed a random issue and beat my retreat. Blessedly, here was Haynes, a true gallant. Let me sidle on back up to him, stood even closer than previous. That'd get the stink off me so far as anyone who'd seen my earlier humiliation was concerned. "Oh, he's tight with Hugh Haynes. Obviously, we've misjudged his character. Peh, that seller was a real hockey puck." Yep, that's precisely the way posterity would record this. Not winning the art contest had soured Alvin's demeanor. It was without doubt true how he said there was no need to hang out in the cellars area, not a dime to split between us. But being skint had never kept us from pointlessly browsing before. I didn't bring this up. Followed him to loiter in the parking lot the few hours until our mom would show up. "You can go look at Badger or whatever," he shrugged. "I'll come get you." "No, I replied, wave of my arm. Felt dismal having my con man prize, him leaving the venue empty-handed, heart in shambles. It was a tough beat for even a seasoned veteran. Couldn't imagine the blow to a starry-eyed amateur. He'd been so certain those hot 100 prize dollars would be tucked down his pocket. You didn't lose, I ventured, trying on some sagacity. It wasn't you versus someone mano a mano. Pretty much everyone didn't win. But semantics fell flat. Alvin was older than me, hip to how such hem-hawing was designed for palookas. Harsh fact. We'd seen with our own eyes the MC award top prize to some plain cake sketch of a character from Elf Quest. Not even peripheral acknowledgement of Alvin's masterpiece. Alvin fixated on how the MC, in Patter with Haynes, had remarked of the winning piece. I recognize the character definitely, but I've never seen this exact picture before. Implying what? I traced mine? How am I supposed to trace through Bristol paper? A fine question. I couldn't sort it, that's for sure. You got shanked, I said to no response. Added, not without genuine conviction, though it's kinda obvious the jam Haynes was in. What did I mean? A person of his standing couldn't hazard any whiff of impropriety. Putting his finger on the scale, meanwhile having a close association with Nexus? Danger of a besmirched reputation. Alvin cogitated on this. Maybe he ought to have thought of that. Yes. Clout could be complicated. Still could have taken a quick minute, shot me a thumbs up when nobody was looking. What would that have cost him? I was reluctant to side against my new friend Hugh, but had to grant Alvin this. Plus, far better to be politic, let the subject drift, than risk blurting out my true suspicion. I'd queered the deal on account of my big, fat mouth. My mind churned the incidents around. Number 1. Hugh had been starting a new sketch for some fanboy, just had the rough outline down, when in fervent awe of the notable similarities in technique I'd crowed, Man, my brother draws exactly like you. Number 2, as if number 1 wasn't enough. When I walked away, not wanting to peel off like I didn't value the bond between us, I'd reiterated, It's really amazing. My brother draws just like you. He did the Nexus picture. You'll seriously see. No reply. Only a fool would fail to recognize the implications. No, Alvin must never know this. I'd bear the shame to my grave. Dusk settled down, the Halloween sing-along an hour off. I'd have to walk to the school alone. My mom was working double hours, my dad was someplace. As alumni, Alvin could tag along if he felt like. He was occupied at Donovan's, however, grinding out a high score in Gunsmoke to snap a verification photo of. Gain notoriety in the pages of Nintendo Power, he hoped. I couldn't get free of Pincho's dead bird. Tons of slugs out overnight lately, so a highly believable narrative. Plus, the information was coming from Pincho himself, according to Alvin. Added up, the inherent veracity worked down my nerves. Distrusting my own eyes even would be a cinch. But this? It was as though the horror had befallen Pincho specifically to cover my peace of mind in a damp sack. I'd waffled between leaving for the school early, shortcutting through the creek while the sun still shone, or leaving as I was, last color sapping from the sky. No choice now but going the long way around, in the dark, past the Montessori school, community playhouse, the neighborhood pool. Not exactly a Sunday stroll. Path sentried by tall grass, brimming with burrs, tangled weeds where ticks gathered in flocks. telephone lines converging, belching static invisibly from time to time, shadows rising in tense fritzes from the mint-white klaxon light of the Montessori, disused transport vans peculiar across the theater's parking lot, pavement in front of the pool, an odd consistency like treading on a picked-at scab. But the creek had seemed frothy with menace, daytime or not. Thoughts of out-of-place glints of sunlight catching on bark, moss, put me in mind of slug residue. Almost made myself frantic over memories of leaning against trunks. Oozing things, perhaps taking aim on me, consolidating into a single plump entity, size and girth of two veiny, strangling hands, positioning over top my unsuspecting, uncombed hair, dropping down, screwing into my head via eyeballs squirmed over top of, around, through ears, up nostrils, dining on me inside to out at a glacial leisure. But able to delay no longer, I took a moment to brace myself at the neighborhood's edge, glanced to the corner house where my family had lived until I turned 4, before something had altered, before this progress, irrevocable, toward whatever was coming. Back then, haunts would find me, but haunts would find me to give me comfort. As I walked, I remembered. The babysitter sent me to bed early. Misbehavior. I'd cried and cried. Climbed into the crib which still occupied the room, a more decorative catch-all than anything of use. A noise like clicking. Through the slats I saw a skeleton, reclined in a squat little chair, pipe pinched in teeth. Its gaze rested on me, serene. Book spread open face down, over knee bone. "I am BU1 skeleton," it whispered, told me to listen to the stories it would read. As I walked, I remembered. A week later, it was discovered how wasps had built a tumorous nest inside my bedroom window, could flatten and creep their way in while I slept. The shadow of Miss Peabody's ballpoint pen made gigantic progress across the gymnasium wall, flicked on each word of the projected lyrics, tapped the appropriate syllable count for each. "The worms crawl in, the worms crawl out, the worms play pinochle on your snout." These sing-alongs, sat in the dark, were the only variety I ever participated in, but tonight I didn't want to be there amongst everybody. After the third song, I claimed an urgent need for the toilet. A 6th grade teacher, Mr. Slinker, manned the gymnasium's double doors. Alvin had got on well with him, and he knew me vaguely. Let me out, no protest. The corridors stretched in darkness. Weakling auxiliary lights every 15 yards along the blue of the painted brick walls. Exit sign red. Seepage from the orange lights of the playground, the parking lot. I could hear a muffle of song as I loitered at the toilet bowl, not needing to void, but figuring I owed the world a play act. O'Reilly is dead and O'Reilly don't know it. O'Reilly is dead and O'Reilly don't know it. No reason to flush. I swayed, arms held in pantomime waltz, singing in whispers. They're both lying dead in the very same bed, and neither one knows how the other one's dead. Squirt of pink soap, scrubbed my hands, attempted to wet palms without success to tame my hair down. I was reluctant to return to the gym. Slinker hadn't come poking his nose around for me after 2 more songs, so I imagined it safe to roam the halls as I saw fit. But my favorite song started up. Decided to hear it out. Pressed forehead to the chilly grid-lined windows just outside the gym.
There was an old woman on skin and bone. Ooh.
Were those flashlights? I squinted out past the basketball courts, down the hill to the long jump pit beyond the tree line separating school property from the wooded area which would eventually join the creek over near my house.
Who lived down by the old graveyard. Ooh.
Definitely. Multiple nervous ticking beams of light while a group of indeterminate number made its way through the brambles.
One night she thought she'd take a walk. Ooh.
Who were they? What numbskulls would risk mucking around a creek in the pitch?
She walked down by the old graveyard. Ooh.
Another kid, dressed dark, made a clumsy beeline across the kickball field, burst through some shrubs to join the gaggle.
She saw the bones all laying around. Ooh.
Clearly older than Alvin, length of a 10th, 11th grader. This had to be the Ghostbusters. I could see no 2 ways about it.
So went to the closet to get a broom. Ooh.
An abrupt metallic rattle, unmistakable as the gym doors opening, caused me to jump. Tense, tuck myself into the wall corner. A louder
ooh
faded as the doors drifted shut under their own power. No one. Then Mr. Slinker, failing to notice me, opened the boys' room. "Ichabod?"
And when she cleared the bones away.
"Right over here, Mr. Slinker."
Ooh.
He must not have heard me.
She saw the church and thought to pray.
"Ichabod!" he tried into the girl's room.
Ooh.
"Mr. Slinker?"
She tarried at the church's door.
I must have been soaked up by some odd blob of shadow.
Ooh.
He passed his eyes right over me, took a few uncertain strides down the corridor.
And in the aisle she tarried more.
"Ichabod!"
Ooh.
I scooted in beside Endy. "Mr. Slinker's been prowling the crowd, casing for you." "How do you know?" "He asked, 'Where's Ichabod?' Seemed obvious what he meant." This put the kibosh on my scheme to claim I'd been present all the while, no fault of mine if Slinker didn't recall my re-entry. Age playing tricks on him, immaterial in the long run. I took a glance around. All seemed calm. "Endy, we need to talk, man. The Ghostbusters are out. In numbers." Endy pointed out how this seemed par for the course as far as gangs. In no mood for deadpan zingers, I laid a rap on him how this likely meant some big league caper was in the offing even as we sat chatting so enjoyably. They're taking advantage of the whole town being here. Okay, he had a point. Our parents weren't, and they represented their primary threat. But most of them are out on dates, probably. And he gave me the signal we'd been zeroed in on by some second-grade teacher, so I might want to pipe down. Ought I risk yet another ejection from assembly? I wished he'd let me tend to my own affairs, but proceedings were wrapping up regardless. There went Mrs. D'Stair, braying about how
last number of the night was written by my big hunk of man hubby.
Woots, woots, whistles, laughters from staff and suck-ups.
And I like to think it's become a local classic.
Because you shoehorn it into every assembly, I mumbled, more to amuse myself than even for Andy to hear. In order to appear attentive, his eyes were strategically glued to the school band lining up. Yep, that second-grade teacher had a bead on me. Wasn't missing a mutter. I turned all attention forward.
Without further ado, Ghost Walk.
Mrs. D'Stair exclaimed, abusing her authority to milk some preemptive applause before the tune even got started. I lambasted Mrs. D'Stair and her toady husband righteously while Andy and I crossed the field in the dark, taking a moment to use the slide before pressing on. Yes, he agreed the ditty was overall a drub, but what harm did it do anyone? And you know it might not have been the Ghostbusters you saw, right? Plus, he had another good thought. What were we supposed to do if they were at the bus stop? Nobody had come up with any concrete maneuver, he pointed out, and it'd only be the two of us versus them. I was about to tweak his nose for being so lily-livered when, A, I realized he was absolutely correct. B, it hit me how I didn't want to confront them either. And C, my foot kicked a flashlight, which then skittered to the edge of the grass, struck against concrete. We instinctively went to our bellies, rigid, stared at the gray breath panting from each other's mouths. Silence, stillness, nothing. Nothing. My teeth were chattering by the time Andy rabbited his head up, glancing left, right, up for some reason, and back the way we'd come. All clear, he shrugged. The concrete the flashlight had struck was the top of the entrance mouth to one of the large sewer tunnels. We skidded our way cautiously down the steep incline of this access port. The tunnel gaped, impenetrable, in front of us. Sour trickle of creek water behind, chunks of cinder block, piles of quartz rock kids tugged from the sandbanks, broken glass, plastic bags, all this rubbish shifting underfoot. I don't think they went in there, Andy said after a time, the remark inserted flawlessly into my exact line of thinking. I leaned in, peering. You said they all had flashlights. We'd see the rest of them, you know? Would we? I wondered. There must be billions of reasons to turn off a flashlight once you're a length down a sewer. I couldn't think of any, but nevertheless... I'd taped 3 pages of Daily Hugo strips onto sheets in sequence, utilizing a downright bonehead method before a savvier technique dawned on me. What I'd done at first? Trimmed lengths of Scotch tape from the squeaky dispenser, each long enough to traverse all 4 panels, used 3 of these to affix each strip, plus 2 more lengths laid horizontal at the extreme right and left edge. A makeshift lamination. Why beat myself up over that? Because now the strips were this way for keeps. At the 4th page, realizing how if inspiration took hold, I might someday desire to repurpose this stuff, I'd started snipping 4 small squares of tape stuck at left, right, top, bottom corners. My palms moistened from the pains taken to only have the adhesive touch down over top blank border areas, no speck of penciled image covered. By way of such prudence, I'd remain able to peel off the strips without undue damage if push came to shove. But 10 pages along it struck me. How's the story supposed to start off with the strip wherein the carrier pigeon is killed by the boomerang? Though, couldn't it? There's such a thing as in media res, don't let's forget. Except, let's prevail upon logic. That's the tail end of the carrier pigeon arc. Over the next 19 strips, nothing whatsoever about it comes up again. Leave it to hang in a reader's imagination? Allow the sequence to develop entirely disassociated from the text? Oh, what the devil was I on about? Why squirm? I'd have to redraw the first 9 strips if I ever revisited this Hugo kerfuffle, which, history had proved, is something I'd have the oompa to pull off, and it'd be the better bet all around, honestly. Being reasonable, I admitted I'd noticed how certain elements of the comic might easily be elided, sequencing altered a tad, improvements. Yes. In quick determination, I thus set it down. I'd laminate the whole kit and caboodle. This complete, I lay on the floor, running my fingertips over the page's pleasantly serrated rough. Except look, it never ends. When I'd pass my fingers up, down, sidewise, for some reason it resulted in the penciling of certain panels becoming blurred. This made 0 sense according to any physical property of nature I'd yet encountered. Official. I'd nix this lame-brained Hugo project full stop, presently, and forevermore. As a symbolic gesture how much I meant business, all the extant pages went into the same trapper-keeper where my earlier abandoned works were quarantined. Inventory of these abortive enterprises. 3 issues of the Adventures of Ichabod, circa 3rd grade, and what survived of the bizarre Calvin and Hobbes cum Tim Burton's Batman hybrid entitled Osgood. The latter I'd stuck with for all of 3 8-panel pages. Looking it over, I could scarce believe my mind had ever been able to conceive of a story which in so slight a space managed to incorporate a child using a grappling hook to steal cookies, a thwarted bank robbery, 2 near-fatal car crashes, a Tommy gun, multiple incidents of disfigurement by acid, and a little brother sidekick bugging he and Osgood's mom about buying a new Sega game. The papers had clearly been crumpled up in an artistic fury at some point, a rage I had no memory of. 1st grade? Kindergarten still? Ages ago. Alvin seemed just as surprised I'd not come down to the basement to see him as I was over his only now coming upstairs, as even bothering to at all considering the hour. I was glued to the television, well into PBS's bang-bang late-night lineup. I'd even suffered through the last few minutes of the new Red-Green show before Doctor Who, and by now Red Dwarf's ending theme was going, Jack Horkheimer's Stargazer about to begin. Out of dull curiosity, I asked him was Dad home. Downstairs, he's eating a jar of peanut butter, drinking warm milk, working on some kind of graph, I think. Typical night, then. I'd better wait a while yet before going to sneak some nutty bars. Nah, I ate all of those. Typical night, then. Those had been mine. But what was I gonna do? Alvin wanted to know. File a writ in the family court? Subject me to a civil action? The Ghostbusters don't use the bus stop anymore. I, for some reason, found myself retorting, head tilt and nostrils flared. Alvin blinked, incredulous. They do? No, they absolutely do. Almost certain they've moved shop, man. Weren't there last night. Last night? Nichols saw them, they were. I let my attention drift to the television to disguise my confusion over Alvin's remarks. However, as I'd missed the start of the show, I'd no earthly idea which constellation merry Mr. Horkheimer was yakking about. Non-committally and not turning back to Alvin, I probed. Literally last night, though? Nichols saw them and you talked to him? Alvin was silent, so I glanced up. I'd been expecting some confrontational posture. Instead, saw he was watching the television, seeming, like me, to be sleuthing out which area of the night sky was being celebrated. He asked me, eyes not averting from the screen, "What was Doctor Who about?" "Dunno," I said. Only honest answer to any episode starring Colin Baker. He chuckled. Then, with abrupt and non-sequitur zest, clapped his hands, turned, and proclaimed to me how he was honestly going to start watching the new Red-Green. And I mean beginning to end, every Saturday night. It's big-time stuff in Canada, someone told me, and it might be funny now that I'm older. In addition, he was giving due diligence to the consideration he might campaign for class treasurer, or else take up drawing a political cartoon he'd photocopy and pass around at school on the regular. Not a certified psychoanalyst, none of these pronouncements could I make heads nor tails of. One thing for sure was they made me realize Alvin was in some sort of acute, diagnosable state. Now was not only not the time to have a serious tete-a-tete, but any of his previous remarks ought only be given minimal scrutiny as well. We heard our dad's sluggish trudge up the stairs, and after a few clicks of adjustment to the thermostat, the walls beginning to whir, he promptly picked the bedroom lock. Simple operation, pad of his thumb pressed down, given a little twist, and quite self-importantly informed us of the current time, wrong by 45 minutes, and how we were to go to sleep. We are. Alvin doused the lights to prove it, buttoned the television off, screen sizzling, snapping bacon fat static crackle as it powered down. We waited in the pitch until we heard the hellion creak of bed springs groaning under his weight. Another 5 minutes until he was done blowing his nose and the first snore issued. Crept to the basement in tandem, finagled the glass sliding door open noiselessly, and wandered over to the long row of poison ivy-tinged pricker bushes where often in our younger days we'd made forts. Both of us were fatigued, so tottered, swayed in loops accordingly, my body shuddering in a kind of numb buzz now and then. But we staunchly chit-chatted even through shivers, slack-jawed and eyes trained skyward through the crosshatch of power lines, pointing at and one eye shut, tracing the flight paths of planes, trying to spot UFOs, or to convince ourselves 100% it wasn't UFOs we were already seeing. Near 3 in the morning, Alvin dropped his efforts to tune in Channel 50. He'd boasted how there'd this one time been a show called Sweating Bullets which depicted actual nudity. Even despite the brackish static programs on 50 had to be filtered through, he'd seen everything some ladies had to offer. I took his word for gospel. Nevertheless, he wanted to see maybe was it on. Just to prove it. There was a topless woman on Rumble of the Bailey once, I suddenly recalled, and tossed the fact out there, supportive of Alvin's agenda. Utterly nonplussed, he wouldn't humor this assertion for a second. PBS doesn't go in for tits at 2 in the afternoon, Nick. Soon he had Channel 54 tuned in. Late Night Kung Fu Theater was just starting up. This time around, the offering was a genuine flop entitled The Incredible Kung Fu Mission. We tried to make the most of things, but the picture was such a turkey, even cracking wise couldn't redeem it. When I wish I was watching Jim Cotta, something's gone ripe, Alvin summed up derisively. So our conversation drifted. As far as kung fu went, what concerned Alvin was hashing out whether any movie starring a counterfeit Bruce Lee, Bruce L.E., Bruce L.I., Bruce L.I.U., was the least bit good. Let's put the matter to bed and have done with it once and for all, shall we? But first, a pressing side investigation. Were those people truly named that? Like by their moms, you mean? That's what he meant, all right. See, Alvin smelled a marketing gimmick. Cynical cash grab films, never mind they were usually such trash they'd not earn back their shoestrings. But I saw the matter through a different aperture and felt bound to say so. They didn't, personally, want to trade on Bruce Lee's name at all. Quite the contrary. What happy chance how L.E., L.I., L.I.U. et al. Could find opportunities, take their collective shot, hunker down to giving it their all in a gambit to rise from obscurity. Any shenanigans, so far as I could see, were on the part of unscrupulous cover artists and poster makers. Returning to the main vein of conversation, I submitted The Furious Killer was good. Affidavit evidence. I can still sing the song from the disco club fight after 2 years and 1 viewing. Alvin called what he thought was my bluff, so I belted out. Love, everyone love. Smile, everyone smile. Dance, everyone have a ball. Before the jangle of my mom turning the front door latch broke in and we both shut our traps. To the sound of the microwave's hum and rattle-rattle, accompanied by the rising aroma of thawing lasagna for one, we zapped the television off, climbed into bed proper, and Alvin switched the radio on, tuning in Q107.3. As the top of the hour hit, news, sports, weather, plus commercials, I figured Alvin had fallen asleep, so positioned myself to luxuriantly break wind, when suddenly, full-throated, he said, "Nate's full of crap a lot." I clenched my butt cheeks, hiccuped, hemmed, and shifted to my side. "What crap's he full of?" The Jabberwocky Alvin laid out left me flabbergasted, the most shocking morsel of balderdash being how Nate had made claim he'd been chased by a shoulder which can turn into a really big tortoise. A shoulder? Trust him. Alvin had not let such preposterousness go unchallenged. What it turned out was, Nate had meant the shoulder, both shoulders, and part of the back and the chest. Alvin related this in dope-toned mimic of Nate's drooly lisp. He was chased by a torso? Alvin snorted. I guess. And sure, of course, I sided with Alvin. Yet part of me couldn't shake how it wasn't altogether impossible, Nate's alleged experience. The torso wasn't explicitly accounted for in our records. The going theory? It was sat someplace like a termite queen, and if its beating heart was pulverized, all the disembodied parts would shrivel due to no longer having it to reattach to and suckle nutrients from. Exactly, Alvin whisper-shouted, fist clenched, definitive. Plus, what does a shoulder kill with? And I'd hit square on the other telltale. Nate says it doesn't kill as the shoulder. It kills as the turtle. Why's it ever bother being a shoulder, then? This is what I have to contend with on the day-to-day, ick. Alvin lamented, voice gravelly, not quite his normal tone, but loud. He's either some Looney Tune, or else causing confusion to get some kind of sick kicks. I could see either scenario turning out to be the case. Never had much cared for Nate, not since he'd that one time tackled me in football when I'd absolutely explained to everyone I was only to be tagged out. Either way, Alvin added after another few minutes' silence, talk like that's gonna wind up with blood on its hands. The Disembodied Parts is presented by Village Idiot Audio. Produced by Lisette Goins and Denver Gregories. Performance by Carlisle Edwards. From the novel by Pablo D'Stair. Audio Supervisor Remy Falk. Music performed by Loyalty Freak.